Hello everybody, I'm Lynn Scanella and welcome to my podcast, Fruitful Conversations, where we chat to people who share their stories to teach and inspire us to be better versions of ourselves. Now, I'm not talking overnight transformations, I'm just talking about baby steps. So my wish is that you listen to this podcast today and you might hear something that resonates, something that makes you think, oh, I could think differently about that, or perhaps I could behave differently in order to be more betterer. Now, I live in the northern rivers of New South Wales, where I bake and I swim and I love to get out in nature. And to put food on the table, I do a bit of speaking, writing and facilitating around helping other people to work with people that they just don't get. I love podcasts and I wanted to share one that I've been listening to lately in case you're looking for something. Josh Zepps, if you don't know Josh, it's S-Z-E-P-S, has a podcast called Uncomfortable Conversations. And as the name suggests, he's going to have some pretty interesting people on. There is, of course, the inimitable Sam Harris talking about self-awareness. And last week, I listened to a really good one called Is Free Thought Dead? With Claire Lehman, who's editor of Quillette magazine. So if you're looking for something to listen to, try out Josh Zepps, loving him at the moment. My guest today is Andy Moore. And Andy is the CEO of Hello Sunday Morning, an organisation who helps people who want to change their relationship with alcohol. Yes, I'm looking at you people. Now, Andy's been in civic service and public health for most of his life. He's worked for lots of different cancer organisations, for Sydney Water, and for our beloved Royal Flying Doctor Service before becoming CEO of Hello Sunday Morning. We did talk about alcohol, of course, and its impact on our lives, which is super interesting. But we also talked about Andy's life, his highs and his lows, and how he's managed them, which may surprise you. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Andy Moore. Okay, hello Andy.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm very well, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. Let's jump in. Tell us about Hello Sunday Morning. How did that get started?
So it's 10 years old actually, and we're celebrating our 10th anniversary at the moment. So you'll see plenty of social media around it. It was started by a guy called Chris Rain, a very young Chris Rain, who was at the time a nightclub promoter, and decided to take a year off from drinking. And as he did so, he blogged about it. And he was always sign off his blogs, Hello Sunday Morning. And as he did so, it kind of opened a lot of conversations and a lot of people who were kind of intrigued about what he was doing. And it kind of started a movement from that point on. And essentially the first beginnings was a website, a blogging platform. And that kind of increased that built a community of around over 100,000 people, essentially, just from that blogging platform. And then in 2016, we launched Daybreak, which is essentially a peer support app where people can go. It's a safe space, it's non-judgmental, where they can talk about their issues of drinking and get support from their peers who are going through the journey or have been through the journey themselves. And since that has started, we've had over 50,000 members through Daybreak, and we've got around 6,000 to 7,000 active members at any one time, which is any active members is, we define that as anybody who's been active within the last month. So, so I think the power of the movement has been a couple of things really around starting a conversation and almost normalizing non-drinking. Any non-drinker would tell you that it's incredibly hard and so much social peer pressure to stop drinking when everybody else around you is doing it, and you almost feel as if you're being ostracized in some way, shape or form. And this, Daybreak and Hello Sunday Morning have really kind of started the conversation around and normalizing the fact that non-drinking is okay. And so that groundswell has started from the bottom up and built this kind of really strong community of people who have really kind of advocated for, and abstinence is not the right word, because we support anybody through whatever journey they want to go through, whether they want to stop drinking completely, whether they just want to change their relationship with alcohol and get a healthier relationship with alcohol, whether they just want to reduce their alcohol consumption. It doesn't matter to us. We don't kind of discriminate, and we don't judge. And I think that's the power of Hello Sunday Morning, is the fact that we don't judge. Daybreakers also is anonymous, so I think people can feel comfortable in openly talking about their own problems and issues with alcohol without fear of being judged in any way. And I think the environment itself of Daybreak is very positive and very supportive. And when you know people who've got lived experience of going through the journey themselves, it's incredibly powerful to know that somebody's there and somebody's supportive and somebody knows what you're going through at the same time. And I think that's really where the power of Hello Sunday Morning, and Daybreak in particular, has really shown its kind of strength. We've got plenty of data that shows that actually there are clinical outcomes from doing this as well. So people have been in the program for a number of months will have reduced their alcohol consumption significantly, and also we measure their kind of psychological distress levels as entering the app and also through time, and we know also that they reduce their psychological distress significantly as well. And so the power for us is that we can provide that support, and at scale and through technology. A lot of people who are problem drinkers find it hard to access alcohol services because of the waiting lists and the underfunding in the system. For people who are wanting support immediately, they can come into Daybreak and get that support immediately. So that's one of the key differences as well. We're a cost-efficient support service as well. So you compare the cost of Daybreak versus other, more intensive kind of services. It's a cost-effective solution as well. So the government have recognised that and have funded us as because of those things as well. So I think there are many benefits both to the community itself and to the sector, that we have a safe place and a non-judgmental place that people can come in and get the support that they need.
That's I think they're the two words that really jumped out at me, Andy, because I joined the Daybreak app, and the first thing, it's so impressive, the first thing that struck me was it's completely non-judgmental, and the community within are so open and caring and supportive, because so many people are wanting to shift their relationship with alcohol but just don't know how. I was also really impressed at the way, as you say, as you come in, it asks you all these questions about, first of all, about your drinking habits naturally and what you want to achieve. So you set the goal. I like that. And I also really liked the questions around psychological stress, because they make you think. I think it's a really caring place to be. No wonder it's successful. At the beginning of this year, at the beginning of COVID, we were all joking about being fat alcoholics at the end. Now it doesn't seem quite so funny. Have you noticed a shift in patterns of drinking this year?
Yeah, definitely. There's a number of pieces of research that have come out, have tracked people's drinking habits during COVID. And we also know retail sales were up as well, quite significantly. I think probably the biggest impact is on drinking habits is on women, and I think they have borne the brunt of a lot of the stresses through COVID, either through financial insecurity or through homeschooling. They've taken the stresses on more than probably anybody, and I think their women's drinking habits seems to have increased as well. And I think obviously because we're not going out so much, drinking habit has changed from probably a lot more binge drinking, social drinking, down to a lot more regular drinking as well. So we're also seeing people drinking a little bit earlier in the day. And so these are habits that are quite worrying. And the longer that COVID comes on and the longer that these behaviours become entrenched, the harder it is obviously for people to be able to change. In Daybreak itself, like in the early days, in the first couple of months, we saw a spike of about 58% in registrations. And we're still seeing an increase now overall, not quite as high as that, but yeah, we're seeing a significant increase in registrations and people coming in. And we know that people come into us are, you know, they do have high levels of risk of drinking behavior as well. And so, yeah, it's the longer this goes on, the more entrenched this becomes. And that's the challenge, and that's the danger and the risk for our society, that because
Yes.
of COVID and the longer that it goes on, the dangers become more real, I think. So, you know, that's something that we are very cognizant of at Hello Sunday Morning, that we need to get the message out that, you know, there is support there and there is immediate support there if people need it. You know, I fully believe, you know, society tells us that drinking is okay and is normal. However, in our own hearts, I think very often people understand that what they're doing is not is not helping them.
Yeah. Well, you know, sorry, go on, Andy.
So I think the beauty of Hello Sunday Morning is allowing people to take that next extra step, that push, that there is something out there that is normal to do, that is not associated with drinking. So I think that's the beauty of Hello Sunday Morning, but it's also the beauty of having these conversations out into the community as much as we can, that actually there is an alternative for people. And I think when society tells you that it's okay to drink and actually it's macho to drink and it's actually quite feminine to drink, because, you know, obviously marketing has not only masculinized drinking, it's also feminized drinking as well. You know, the marketing tactics have been very clever. What we've got to do is just to give people that alternative, you know, that there is an alternative out there, and those conversations and around not drinking become more common in society, that counterweight this kind of you know, this swell of, you know, drinking is normal and drinking is great and drinking is, you know, all these positive benefits. You know, and we're trying to do that in a very positive way. We're not trying to finger point or wag the finger at anyone,
I know.
or be judgmental about it. But what we are doing is trying to provide people a bit more inspiration and opportunity to seek out alternatives. Because I truly believe that many people know in their own kind of intrinsic world that what they're doing is not quite right and it's not helping them.
Yeah, you see, I think for a lot of us, we would say, I have my alcohol consumption under control. So how does Hello Sunday Morning define under control?
Well, I mean, there are specific measures that give you an indication of what that looks like in terms of the drinking health guidelines. You know, you don't drink any more than 2 standard units. I can't remember how many exactly units a week, but you know, and no more than 4 standard units on one sitting. However, we don't dictate to people what control looks like. You know, it's up to the individual to kind of to try and define that for themselves in a way, because we don't say to people that you need to stop drinking completely. What we're looking for is to help people understand what a healthy relationship looks like. Now that's different for different people. You know, for me, for example, you know, I'm the sort of person that's on or off with consumption, so it's easier for me to just stop.
So you do drink alcohol?
Yeah, I drink alcohol. Yeah.
But you manage your consumption?
I do now. Yes.
Is that because of this job?
No. I knew it was doing no good for me. Probably about 4 years ago, I changed my relationship with alcohol, and I'd been wanting to change my relationship with alcohol for years. I knew it.
So how did you do it?
Well, I have a very supportive wife. So, you know, I mean, without going into any detail,
sure. You don't need to. I'm just interested in the steps that you might have taken, because it's very difficult to, you know, at times in my life, because I drink alcohol, I've had times where I go, I'm going to take a month off. And most people I know who do that do it almost to prove that they can. So then it means you don't have a problem. So I'm just interested in, in how what tools you had.
I think for me, well, it wasn't the tools that I had. I wanted to give up alcohol for a long time. For me, it was having the support of people around me. So my wife, my second wife, was really a non-drinker. Not really a non-drinker. She drinks 1 or 2 drinks, but she doesn't drink. So all of a sudden, when we met, which was probably about 3 years ago, I was put into an environment where drink wasn't really there. And it actually made me think very, very clearly about what my drinking habits were. And it felt very strange to me at that point to actually drink in an environment where drink wasn't really present. And it kind of turned the whole conversation on its head for me of like, how absurd is this kind of thing? And I think for me, you know, I mean, I drank for boredom, I drank for stress, I've drunk for loneliness, all those kinds of things that everybody drinks for. But I think, you know, my drinking habits went from one of social in my younger days to much more entrenched in, you know, having a glass of wine at the end of the day and that sort of stuff, you know, I've had a bad day. And, you know, suddenly when this environment was created for me where that wasn't the case, I just stopped immediately, like literally overnight. It just stopped.
So it says a lot about our peer groups and who we socialize with. So I know, for example, if I'm having a month off alcohol, I'm looking more at my friends who don't drink to go for bushwalks and do outdoor activities perhaps more, or come over for tea and cake rather than come over for a glass of wine. So it says a lot about our social groups.
Well, it says a lot about our social groups, but it also says a lot about support as well.
Yes.
And that you do need a bit of a helping hand with these things, and you can't do it on your own. And, you know, willpower is not going to get you through it. You need individual kind of self-efficacy, but you also need people around you to support you as well. You know, if you're in an environment where everybody's drinking all the time, it's just so difficult. And
it's almost impossible. You know, I've been in so many situations where people have gone, just one, it's so-and-so's birthday. Just one. Come on, it's Monday. Tomorrow you can start afresh. We have so many ways of pushing people into having that one drink. And my friends who are recovering alcoholics have a strategy where they then, and I'm talking about, you know, serious alcohol abuse here, not just someone who's wanting to shift the relationship a little with alcohol. I have a couple of friends and they go to a party and they stay a couple of hours and they're out.
Yes,
exactly. So when everyone starts getting a bit sort of sparky, they know that they need to leave.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, isn't it?
I'm exactly the same. The same. If I go to a party, an hour, 2 hours most, and then I'm off. And you know what? You realise when you're not drinking as well that staying for that amount of time gets incredibly boring after a while as well.
People aren't actually as interesting as they seem to be without alcohol.
No, they're not at all.
So true. That's so funny. Hey, listen, let's switch tack a little bit. Back in 94, you were running school excursions in France. Did you think in 2020 that your career would have taken you to become CEO of an organisation like this?
The simple answer to that would be no. You know, I didn't think I had really any aspirations of what I wanted to do then. I knew what I didn't want to do. You know, I'd worked before that point in retail marketing in a you know, one of the biggest retailers in the UK, and I didn't enjoy that at all. And then I went and worked in Hong Kong, and I worked in PR consultancies. So marketing and PR was kind of my thing, but I was working in a PR consultancy in Hong Kong, and we were working for a retailer there, and we were doing some Christmas promotions for a pharmacy. And I remember actually writing a press release about a free teddy bear that you could get on a purchase. And I was thinking at the time, God, has my life come to this where I'm writing a press release about a teddy bear?
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, one of the clients that we had at the time was Reader's Digest. And our job for that client was to basically rewrite some of their articles before their editions came out, and put them into the papers so that, you know, they could get a bit of coverage. And one of the articles that I wrote about at the time was about a guy who got testicular cancer. And reading the article, I realized actually I've probably got some of those symptoms. And just that article made me go to the doctor straight away. And
what?
the same, yep. And
Right.
by the end of the day, I was diagnosed with testicular cancer. And that was the point at which my whole life shifted in terms of what I wanted to do and the direction that I wanted to take. You know, I knew before that point, I didn't want to do marketing for stuff that was just not important, you know, whether it was retail or whether it was hospitality or whatever it was. It just, you know, it just didn't really, it didn't really float my goat at all. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew what I didn't want to do, and I was just really kind of floating around without any direction. And you know, a diagnosis of cancer and the recovery from that was really the kind of the impetus to understand that actually this is what I wanted to do. And I've always had a big picture view of the world, and I've always had a kind of an ideological view of the world, but I didn't really realize it at the time. And that just sharpened the kind of sword in terms of what I wanted to do quite immediately, because after I was given the all clear, which was probably about 6 months later, I started work for a cancer charity. And I was there for about 8 years, and you know, I was really looking away because my role kind of just grew and grew and grew. And I was looking after, you know, I was education and basically PR at the time. But I was doing a lot of work in cervical cancer screening. I was doing a lot of work in breast cancer, and I was doing a lot of work in tobacco advocacy. And at the time in Hong Kong, there was no national screening program for cervical cancer. And the government decided that they wanted to set one up. And I was invited onto their cervical cancer task force, which was headed at the time by a woman called Margaret Chan, who then went on to head the World Health Organization. So it was a very, very high level committee. And I was the only non-clinician on that committee. And I was, you know, fairly young at the time and completely out of my depth as well. But that was a massive learning experience for me in terms of policy and policy direction, and, you know, how to really instigate, you know, big change within society. And that kind of really sparked my interest there. And, you know, I went off to do, before I came to Australia, I went and did my master's in public health, because I thought, you know, public health was something that I really wanted to do. And I wanted a more technical career than marketing. And I think I realized quite soon after getting a more technical job, that I didn't want to do a technical career. I wanted a real appreciation of public health, and I wanted to really be part of the public health movement, but I was not really cut out to be a public health practitioner at the time, I think. So I wasn't, you know, I wasn't pedantic enough and detailed enough, really.
Yeah. So working with your strengths, and you've come out of a marketing and PR background, so that would be natural. So that was why you've worked for so many different, I was going to ask that, why you've worked for so many different cancer organizations. And what an incredible opportunity to learn, though, about all that policy. Because now in a CEO role, you can't be a CEO if you can't appreciate both sides of the brain, I guess, is what I'm saying. You need to have a clear view of policy and procedure and a big picture view, but you also need, especially in your role, to have a very human viewpoint as well. So now this is your first CEO role, which must be a wonderful achievement in anybody's life. What would you say? What's your advice then to your 20-year-old self?
It's probably still the advice that I give myself now, is just don't, you know, try not to listen to your own negative thinking so much. And, you know, don't, I think, you know, I, for many years, and still am to a certain extent, am my own worst enemy. And, you know, I'm learning to just stop listening to my own kind of negative chatter, because that's the stuff that holds me back. And it's probably the stuff that holds many people back.
Everyone.
And so, you know, just for me, it's just get yourself out there, put yourself in situations that you're not comfortable with, you know, develop as much as you possibly can, show up, and be present, really. I think they're the key things for me. And I think as a leader over time, and it's funny, I think when you grow as a leader, you learn kind of conscious things, but you actually learn a whole much more unconscious things that suddenly come to the fore when you need them. And I think in many ways, I'm an observer of behavior, and always have been, and that's what interests me in this role, and it interests me in any role. But it also interests me in terms of leadership. And I think over time I've had brilliant leaders, and over time as well I've had not so brilliant leaders, and I've probably learned as much from the not so brilliant leaders as I have from the brilliant leaders, because it's taught me about what not to do. And those are the things that I kind of continually bring into my role now, in terms of, doesn't matter how uncomfortable it makes me feel to show up and be a visible leader, for example, because I'm not an extrovert, those things tire me out and, sap my energy. But I've seen what happens if it doesn't happen. I think it's incredibly important to be a very visible leader and a very kind of open leader. And I think as well, I'm naturally a kind of an open person. And I've seen leaders as well who are not so open, and I don't connect with that. I don't kind of attach myself to that, because it feels a bit abstract and it feels like there's a barrier between you.
Yes.
And so, I've gone into this role really reflecting on that, and making sure that, I am open, I am authentic, and I am honest, because I think people do respond to that. There's a level of honesty. You've got to get the balance right, of course.
Of course.
But, there is nothing to be gained by, I think, holding stuff in and not being honest about, it's simple things, really. Even in meetings, if you don't know the answer to something, then I'm much more comfortable these days in just saying I don't know, and let's work on a solution, because I think people respond to that. I don't think people necessarily expect to have leaders to have all the answers these days. I think, in my view, a leader's responsibility is to facilitate the solutions out of your teams, not necessarily tell them what the solution is. And I don't, I know, I'm a self-analyzing person. That's where this negative chatter comes from. But the plus side of the kind of the self-analysis is that you're self-aware. I know what my strengths are, and I know what my weaknesses are. So, I rely on my teams to kind of plug the gaps in terms of my own weaknesses, really. And I'm comfortable with that. I'm really comfortable in that, because, there is no such thing as perfection. And I think if we strive for that, then we put these expectations on ourselves that just aren't attainable as well. So I think for me, it's, my leadership style, you might get something different from my team, but I think, they would say that I'm very authentic and honest and open, and, I do listen to everybody's views. I think the other part of it as well is having very different kind of opportunities in my life, from policy and education and more public health areas into more marketing and fundraising areas. It kind of means that I'm much more agnostic in terms of what the solution should be. I don't kind of go, oh, this is I have a marketing expertise, so this is a marketing solution, or this is a policy. I'm much more open and much more I work very hard to elicit the responses from my team to try and get the right solution to the right problem, not trying to think of it from a biased point of view based on what my own experience and own background is. So I try to make sure that I bring in an unbiased viewpoint as well. However,
great advice.
I have to make decisions. So, and sometimes that's not popular. And you just gotta do it. But
sure, that's part of a leadership role.
Yeah, as long as you're clear on your expectations with people in terms of what your role and what their role is, people understand that, not necessarily what their opinion will get over the line in terms of whether I make a decision on that or not, because that's my role at the end of the day. So I think, that's what I'm striving for. Whether I'm not the right person to tell you whether I'm good at it or not. I think probably my team are the best people to tell you that. But
it sounds like you're doing a pretty good job there, Andy.
Well, yeah, hopefully.
Tell me, what would be the biggest challenge that because we're all about life lessons here and learning, what would be the biggest challenge that you've ever had in your life?
So I think there's two. There's the cancer challenge, and that was a physical challenge, really. And at the age of 26, that's, I knew I was up to the challenge, really. From a
Yeah.
physical point of view, what I wasn't expecting was the mental kind of impact of cancer, and trying to overcome that. And I think I didn't do a very good job on reflection in terms of accepting cancer as a part of my life, and would always be a part of my life, forevermore, really, because physically I still have impacts because of it. And I think, as a 26-year-old, one of the things that I did do was, once I was recovered, was to try and almost escape it and just get on with my life as normal. But it doesn't escape you. It's part of your life. You have to go through regular screening. I was being screened every 3 months. I was getting monthly blood checks in the first year. I was getting CT scans every 3 months. And so you can't actually escape it. So trying to fight against that and not accepting it it causes you more stress. And I think it caught up with me over time. And I think when I had kids, first daughter was in 2005, second daughter in 2008. I think my coping mechanism always was to try and just kind of forge on ahead and just carry on. And then, I worked for Sydney Water, which at the time was kind of stressful job because we were at the height of drought. And then we were at the height, we were bringing in diesel, and my job was kind of the external communications and marketing. So having to deal with the Labor government and the Min's office at the time was quite stressful. And again, my coping mechanism was just to carry on, really. I'm I've got over cancer. I can carry on. I'm strong.
I can do anything.
I can do anything, but I wasn't really coping, I don't think. And and I think I can't remember what year it was, probably 2011, where the whole ICAC stuff kicked off in terms of Australia Water Holdings, and the Bollard Granger with Barry O'Farrell hit. And that, Sydney Water was under the spotlight with ICAC at the time, and that really changed the organisation internally. It became a lot more kind of toxic, and myself and my boss were under the spotlight, just because we were very kind of externally facing. The organisation wanted to kind of shut all that down and was worried about anything that kind of got out externally, essentially. So we were put under a fair amount of pressure. And I think I just buckled under that pressure in 2011 because I really hadn't learned how to cope with anything in terms of stress up to that point. My boss had resigned because it was too much for her. And that kind of triggered me. I think it wasn't her fault or anything like that, but I think I was basically suffering from depression up to that point. And then I just unraveled in 2011, and I was diagnosed with severe depression at that point.
Wow.
And that was, I think that's probably the toughest thing to try and overcome, because realistically I sought help too late. So I was at the severe end of kind of diagnosis, which made it very difficult to then turn that around. And, it makes you reevaluate your life. You don't kind of just recover from something like that, because there's a lot within your own psyche that you have to kind of work on, really, and your own, I guess, mental health development you have to work on. You have to really relearn how you've kind of grown up in your life, and the coping mechanisms that you've kind of adopted from an early age are not the coping mechanisms that help you in life generally, I think, as an adult. And that
so
was
you'd let it go so far, hadn't you?
I had.
It's like anything. If you grab a cancer diagnosis early, you've got a better chance of survival. If you go, oh, I'm not working with alcohol so well right here, let's see what I can do about it. But you just kept powering through and tipped yourself right over the edge where you, as you say, unraveled. What did that look like? What did that feel like at the time?
Unraveling.
Yeah.
It's not a nice experience. I would say for a long time I couldn't feel anything emotionally. I just felt like an empty shell, really. So the good, the bad, the ugly, anything, you just didn't feel it. You just felt numb. I felt just my whole body was heavy. Getting out of bed was just really hard, and getting myself to work and dragging myself to work was really hard. And it got to the point where I couldn't really, even conversations, I was finding it hard to follow. I could hear the words, but I just really wasn't interpreting it very well. And you just feel completely hopeless as well. There's many things that you kind of go through at the time. I had to kind of do something about it.
How long was that period in your life? You said it started around 2011 or 2012?
It's hard to put an endpoint on it. I don't think there is ever an endpoint anymore. I have to be vigilant now. I have to really look after my mental health. I have to, I make sure, I obviously don't drink alcohol. I kicked caffeine years ago as well. So they were things that were kind of impacting my sleep.
Sure.
I exercise often. I make sure that I have, I work 9 to 5 and don't, obviously there's periods where that changes, but, I'm pretty vigilant on my kind of work hours and trying to switch off and things like that. Because that was the thing that undid me, really. I was working all hours and just put everything into my work. And I think when you become depressed, you lock the world around you outside, and you kind of micro focus on things, and you kind of throw yourself into one thing. And that one thing was work for me, I think. And I just I blocked out everything else. I think that probably took me about a year to recover from that, realistically, before I got to the point where I could really kind of work properly again.
So how did you start a recovery? You recognized it. You obviously had this unravelling that was happening, but you were still trying to work through it and get to work. Like, what were the steps that you took? Because I know, there's this year in particular, unfortunately, in conjunction with our alcohol consumption, mental health problems have gone through the roof. What were the initial steps that you took to try and help yourself?
It wasn't about helping myself. It was about seeking help. It was acknowledging that I had an issue and then seeking help. And then once that started, that kick-started the recovery, really. So obviously I went to see a doctor, and then I went to see a psychiatrist. And then that was the starting point for me, really. And that was a year-long intensive process of counselling, like really intensive counselling over a year. And that helped me understand what I've been going through and why I kind of implemented certain coping strategies that weren't the best coping strategies for me. And that really helped me kind of reflect on who I was as an individual and what I needed to do about it. So I think that kind of period of self-reflection was really important. It was an incredibly intensive time, but it allowed me to really understand what I was doing wrong and what I needed to do about it. And you don't change your behavior overnight, and you don't suddenly become this kind of mental health warrior, or I'm still working on it now. But I do recognize now when I'm starting to struggle, and I do something about it. And the key thing for me is communication. The pre-diagnosis me would have just gone into my own shell when I was stressed and just kind of absorb it and not talk about it and just become silent and go into my own space. Now I recognize that when I'm starting to happen, I bring it out into the open more. And actually just doing that is an enormous weight off your shoulders. And I think that is the difference really for me, is that I've learned to communicate better about my own feelings.
I think, Andy, that's probably the best message to come out of that is recognize it, understand it, communicate something about it, because then it's not something that is cured overnight, as you say. It's probably something that you live with forever, but once you recognize the symptoms, you've got a plan of attack.
Yep.
Andy, it's been lovely chatting to you, and I could talk to you about a lot more things, but we have run out of time. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for being on the show. We're very grateful.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
See you, Andy.
See ya.
Bye. He's one of the good guys, isn't he, Andy? And his advice around depression is really wise. If you're suffering from depression in any way, don't try and forge ahead and don't leave it too late. There is always support, whether with your friends and your family. And if you can't talk to your friends and family or you choose not to, there's always excellent organisations like Beyond Blue. I also really liked Andy's advice to not let the negative chatter get in the way, because it's so limiting, isn't it? That negative chatter that tells us maybe that we're not good enough. So ban those guys and get the negative chatter out of your head. Also enjoyed his thought to show up and be present, even when we're in uncomfortable situations, and perhaps to even look for those uncomfortable situations, because that's the best place for us to grow. And if you're looking to shift your relationship with alcohol, head to hellosundaymorning.org and the excellent Daybreak app. You're going to find a very non-judgmental, warming, open community there. And it doesn't have to be about giving alcohol up altogether. You might just be going, whoa, I put on some COVID kilos and I think I'm drinking a bit much and I'd like to just shift it a bit. It's an awesome start to get over to hellosundaymorning.org. And if you'd like to know more about me, head to lynscanella.com.au, where you can do the quiz to find out what your personality preference is, apple, mango, lime, or banana. And take a look at the workshops, all my offerings, virtual and non-virtual, that I have over there. And as usual, if you've liked this podcast, I would love you to pop on over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. Tell a friend, and that's the way that we get this fruity community moving along and growing. As always, it's been lovely to have your company. Thank you so much for listening and for being with us. Be kind to each other. Respect, connect, and thrive. I'm Lynn Scanella, and this has been Fruitful Conversations.